Good morning, everyone. Good to see you. I hope you're all well. It is time for Thursday morning Torah. Let me see if I can adjust this a bit so that you can see me for Thursday morning Torah. There, a little bit better. Okay. So one of the things I want to say is that it is strange but true that sometimes the title of the Parsha has more humor than the substance of the Parsha. And that is certainly true this morning. It's like when you have Lech Lecha, which means go, at a time that Abraham arrives, or you have the Ten Commandments, which is in the Parsha that is named for a Midianite priest named Jethro. And this morning, you have Jacob dying, and the Parsha is called "And He Lived," Vayechi. So I don't know if that humor is intentional, but it is nonetheless, maybe it's not humor, but there's a certain irony to the way that the Parsha is named. And this is the last Parsha in the book of Genesis, and I want to talk about it in a couple different ways, starting with something that I actually noticed for the first time this morning when I was looking at the Parsha previous to the class, which is that it says that Joseph was 17 years old when he was cast into slavery. And then later it says that Jacob lived in Egypt. Jacob lived in Egypt for 17 years. And that parallel, I don't think, can possibly be coincidence or inadvertence. I think the text is clearly trying to tell us that sometimes it takes as long to undo what you have done as it does to do it. That is, it took 17 years to build up the kind of family disharmony and anger and so on that ended up casting Jacob into slavery, Joseph into slavery, and his father's presence was required for about the same amount of time in order to truly overcome the deleterious effects of the early years of Joseph's dreaming and antagonizing his brothers and being cast into the pit. So I think this is an interesting and truthful to our experience kind of parallelism, that it can take as long to undo something, sometimes longer, as it does to create the situation in the first place. Now, the other part of Vayechi, the other two parts that I want to address today, or really three, because I think I want to give the whole arc of the book of Genesis before we move on. But the two issues of this Parsha in particular, without seeing it just as a culmination of everything that came before, have to do with the fact that Jacob blesses all of his children before he dies. Now, some blessings are more positive than others. A modern scholar of the Bible would say that these blessings are retrojected. That is, the tribes had certain situations when they were in the land of Israel, and the blessings parallel the situations of the tribes once they're already in the land. But of course, the tradition sees this as prophetic. That is, Jacob is predicting the future of his children, and in the case in particular of Shimon and Levi, rebuking them for their behavior in the incidents probably of Dinah is what we are talking about here. Shimon and Levi are a pair. Their weapons are tools of lawlessness. I'm now reading from chapter 49, verse 5. Let not my person be included in their council. Let not my being be counted in their assembly. For when they're angry, they slay men, and when pleased, they maim oxen. That also you could see as a kind of funny line. It's a nice day, everybody's happy, let's go maim some oxen. But of course, it's not supposed to be funny. It is supposed to mean that even when they are not enraged, they cause damage. So Jacob is here both critiquing and blessing simultaneously, as parents often do. And it's his final offering to the children that will become the tribes of Israel. And he says, come together that I can tell you what will happen basically at the end of time. But he says the days to come, the end of time. And that's the second issue I want to bring up is the idea that time has an end and that there will be an end to time. The messianic idea that there are bookends to time. There is the Garden of Eden at the beginning of time, and then there is the messianic era at the end of time, is a very powerful and continuing idea, of course, in Jewish history. And here Jacob is making some appeal to the possibility that you can somehow get a glimpse of what that would be. Now, a number of commentators talk about the fact that you can't fully know, obviously, what will happen at the end of time, and you can't describe that which has never been experienced. One of the things that always struck me about science fiction is it's always a composite of things we have experienced with a twist, because how can I have no language to describe that which is not common to everybody's experience. It's like trying to describe the taste or the color of an orange to somebody who has never tasted or seen anything like an orange. It's impossible to use words to describe experiences that have no analog in the person's own life history. And so the best that Jacob can do is say what your future is going to be, as opposed to what the actual end time is going to be. But I bring it up in part because the notion of an end time hangs over the entire Torah, and in fact over the Jewish tradition. And this is the first sort of explicit acknowledgement, I believe, of the reality that there is some kind of end, that history is not an endless unspooling of events, but rather is teleological. That is, it is aiming towards something. And Judaism is a teleological faith. Judaism is a faith that sees history not as an endless circle, but as a spiral. That is, there are circles within it, but as a spiral that actually moves towards an end, and that end will be at a time of God's choosing, although there are, as you may know, endless midrashim, rabbinic statements about the ways in which we can try to accelerate the coming of the Messiah. And in fact, this was, just as a side note, maybe of interest to you, may not, this was the principal objection theologically of, for example, the Satmar Rebbe to the establishment of the State of Israel, which is that he thought it was dochakim et haketz, it was forcing the end. It was, that is, Jews are supposed to return to Israel when the Messiah comes, and you're not supposed to force God's hand by returning there before the Messiah comes, as though you get to decide what the messianic timetable is, and God doesn't decide. There's more to his theological objection, but that is at the core of it. And therefore, the practical consequences of a messianic belief in Jewish history are quite serious. And the secularism of the founding of the State of Israel, the founding fathers and mothers, who were almost all labor Zionists and secular, was not coincidental. It's because in the very religious world of Eastern Europe in particular, it was thought of as anti-Jewish in some deep sense, to create that which God is supposed to have created. Now, there are endless nuances to this debate, and there were religious Zionists, even at the beginning, Alkali, Kalish, or others, but nonetheless, this was a very common objection. So to bring us back to Vayechi, which is right there, in the Tanakh, you understand that Jacob is both predicting the future and also hinting at an ultimate future before he is gathered to his kin. Now, one interesting question that I don't have any answer to, and I really should, I don't know that I've ever asked this, but I would be really interested if there's any commentary on it, and I should check it out and see if I can find some, is we know that Joseph, after he dies, is brought back to Eretz Israel, the land of Israel. And Moses, in fact, is engaged, as the Exodus is happening, is engaged in finding the bones of Joseph to bring them back to Israel. What about all the other brothers? How come Judah or Benjamin or Yisachar or Zvulun or Shimon or Levi or any of them, didn't they say to their kids, be sure to bring me back to the land of Israel? How come only Joseph goes back? I don't know. I'm sure, I have no doubt this is addressed somewhere. I'm not familiar with it. And if anybody has any ideas or knows of any commentary that does address it, I certainly would be very interested to see what the speculation is about why it is that the other brothers are not concerned with bringing the body back to Israel. Now, we have reached the third of the three issues that we want to talk about, which is Vayechi as the round off of the entire Torah. That's the entire book of Genesis, rather. Genesis starts, of course, with creation. And the narrowing of the book then gives way to a widening of the book. And what I mean by that is you have all of creation, then gradually there is a focus on one people, on Israel. And that's because of successive disappointments. The disappointment of the flood, the disappointment of the Tower of Babel. Finally, God says, okay, I'm going to try to pick one people and make it work with that. It's still not so easy, as we discover in Abraham's family and subsequent generations. But God starts with, properly put, one couple with Abraham and Sarah and expands it into a family. And then the family now at the end of Breshit, at the end of Genesis, having been established, we're going to open it up into a people. And the close of the book of Genesis, Joseph died at the age of 110 years and was embalmed and placed in a coffin in Egypt. Doesn't say where, just in Egypt. Gives way then to the peoplehood of the book of Shemot, the book of, in Hebrew, Shemot means names, right? But in English, the book of Exodus. So what you have is Genesis establishing the family that will become the people and going through all the various trials that are necessary in order for God to present enough of the values of Israel so that when the Exodus happens, there will already be some foundation of religious approach that the people can become a part of once they're ready to leave Egypt. So what you have then in the Tanakh is this this systolic and diastolic movement, this getting smaller and getting larger, until you come then to Egypt. And once you're in Egypt, obviously you're going to have then the grand drama of the Exodus, which we're going to start with next week with the book of Shemot. But all of this is dependent on taking a single family and having them work out their dynamics. And the reason that that is so fascinating, at least to me, is the notion that the creator of the universe, that his canvas or her canvas, not to assign God a gender, especially in our day when gender is such a hot button topic, and God has none. But the idea that the creator of the universe would choose as a canvas the single family tells you something about not just the Jewish tradition, but something about fundamental human nature. Because the older I get and the more people that I speak to in all walks of life, the more I'm convinced that that this part, for all that Freud may have gotten wrong, the part of his essential insight that is deeply true is how much your early upbringing always has a grip on your life. It doesn't change. And that's quite remarkable. Thank you. Somebody Googled it about why doesn't the Torah explicitly record anything of the burial of brothers. Bechor Shor says that Joseph was worried that since Egypt would give him such a formal, honorable burial, blah, 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 people would say the other part, therefore, the book of Judges reminds his brothers and us that despite any honor a Jew's place always in the land of Israel, Joseph's fate is tied to that of his true brothers who will be transported back and not with the people of Israel. I'm not sure what that means. So that means that they will eventually be brought back to Israel. It says that all of Joseph's brothers were ultimately buried in the land of Israel. Each tribe took the remains of their own patriarch as they left Egypt. That's a nice midrash, and that makes sense midrashically. I'm sure at some point in my life I saw that, but I forgot it. The only exception was Joseph's own tribes, Ephraim and Manasseh, since the Torah tells us that Moshe himself took Joseph out of Egypt. The midrash bases this tradition on the Hebrew word etchem, which is plural, with you, in the verse. Joseph says, my body will be transported etchem, with your bodies, back to Egypt. Okay, I like that. Thank you. And thank you, Rabbi Google. And also thank you, Tyrone Tuckman, for supplying us with the answer. So that is the fact that the family is the focus, and there is a beautiful example of that is I think deeply true to human nature. And this circles back with what we started with, that Joseph was 17 when he left Egypt, and Jacob was 17 years when he left Israel, and Jacob was 17 years in Egypt, and that there is a certain symmetry to the hurt and the healing of the family in each way. Now, I received a request to tell you about the chess tournament, because as many of you know, I was in Dubai last week. That's why I did not give a Torah class last week. So I'm still a little jet lagged since I got back on Monday, and it's literally 12 hours apart. So right now, when it is 9:19 in LA in the morning, it's 9:19 at night in Dubai. It was interesting. The chess tournament was interesting. I came towards the end after the epical sixth game. I came 2 games later, and the sixth game was quite remarkable, and was the longest game in World Championship history, which meant it went past midnight, and they ended up playing 2 games on the same day, which is the first time that's happened as well in a World Championship. The champion Magnus Carlsen, who won very convincingly, he won 4 games and drew all the rest. And Nepomniachtchi, who was the Russian challenger, didn't win any. Who's Jewish, by the way. Not that I take any pride in the fact that about half the world champions have been Jewish, half the world chess champions. But even those who were anti-Semites, like Fischer, was actually Jewish. But he was crazy. He was brilliant, but he was crazy. Nonetheless, the fun of it was to see all these great chess players congregate, including the former world champion, 5-time world champion Anand, Vishy Anand, who's an Indian chess player, and provided commentary in the hall for anybody who chose to watch, which I did part of the time. Some of the time I was sitting inside watching the game. Some of the time I would come out and listen to what he had to say. And it was, like any hobby creates its own world. Whatever it is you're interested in, and if people didn't know that, they know that now with the internet. Anything that you're interested in, there's a world around it. And I remember when I was a kid, I was a tournament chess player in high school and a little bit in college. I used to go to the chess club, and there was an entire world there, and everybody knew everybody, and everybody knew people's quirks. And chess players, as you might imagine, are notable for their quirks. And so it was fun to re-enter that world. One of the things about Carlsen, the current world champion, is he's excessively normal. He loves sports. He was #1 in the world in the fan football league of soccer. So he has an extraordinary mind. He's very gifted, has a remarkable memory, but he grew up in a really sound family. His father seems to be a lovely and normal guy who was his coach for a while before he turned him over to a professional coach. And Carlsen himself is articulate in several languages, is funny, is excessively normal for one of the greatest chess players in history. Most of whom had their peculiarities, which might not surprise you. So it was a lot of fun to watch. And Nepomniachtchi, the reason that he lost was, first of all, because I think right now there is nobody in the world who is as good as Carlsen. It's just that simple. But also Carlsen's stability is extraordinarily impressive. That is, once he won that very, very long game, Nepomniachtchi more or less fell apart, and in subsequent games made mistakes that he would never have made in normal conditions. And Carlsen stays very steady. When they asked him what his strength was, he said, in quiet positions, I make very few mistakes. And that's really, that's not easy to do. So the accuracy of his moves, because now we know with computers what moves are accurate, is very, very high. And he rarely makes serious mistakes. Anyway, so that part was, that was fun. That was fun. There is one possible, now Carlsen has now beaten all the possible challengers, although the matches have been very close. Two of them ended basically in draws and then had to be decided by rapid chess, by chess at a much faster time pace. So it's not like although he's gotten better, he's probably now pretty far out ahead of his rival. There is, however, one young Iranian chess player who, because he was not allowed to play against Israel, defected from Iran and now lives in France. His name is Ali Reza Firouzja, and he's only 18, but he's extraordinarily successful. And Carlsen said explicitly, like, if it was Firouzja, he might be interested in another match. And I think that Firouzja might be, although 18 is awfully young to challenge for the world championship, Carlsen himself is 31. I think 22 is the youngest that anyone ever won the championship. But he's the only person that I think could probably give Carlsen a run for his money right now. But one never knows. It's people emerge and surprise you. So nobody would have predicted that Nepomniachtchi would be the next. He was in the top 10, maybe the top 5. But I think that nobody would have predicted that he would have been the next challenger. That most people would have thought that, again, Caruana, who challenged Carlsen before and is an American grandmaster, would be his next opponent. Okay, so I hope that is. As for Dubai, by the way, I'll just say a word about Dubai for those of you who have any interest in what it's like. It is, on the one hand, extraordinarily impressive. It's a society that's really grown up over the past 25 years. Only 15% of the population are actual emirates. So it's very hard to get citizenship there. Basically, you have to be extremely wealthy. And you can work there for a long time, but you can't be a citizen because they don't want to get swamped and no longer have a country. But they have built up an infrastructure and a tremendous success. It is a country that seems, to my amateur eye, at least the Dubai part of it, to be basically based on wealth. It is a kind of Las Vegas without the gambling. It's very rich. The hotels are gorgeous. The streets are perfectly clean. There's virtually no crime. I went into Abu Dhabi for a day and saw what's called the Louvre of Abu Dhabi because it's associated with the Louvre in France. It's not at all like the Louvre. It's actually a one-story museum that's supposed to tell the history of civilization. It's very, very beautiful and very well done. I was sorry to see that in the Hall of Religions, the only thing they had from Judaism was a tombstone. I'm told that they used to have an old Tanakh there, but it wasn't there when I went. But it is a very, very impressive museum. The Grand Mosque, which is a brand new building, is also impressive in its way. It is very much diminished by the fact that when you go, the underground passageway to the mosque is through a mall that has a McDonald's and a Papa John and other such establishments, which I must say both made me feel better about the synagogue gift shop and also seriously diminishes the sense of sanctity in walking into the mosque. But it's a beautiful structure. And again, as clean as it is, I mean, here, the old cliche, you could eat off the floor, is probably literally true. So it's a new society. And as a new society, it has built itself up very, very well. But of course, it also has very old roots. And that mixture is somewhat uneasy in a hyper-capitalist place like Dubai seems to be. So those, anyway, are my general impressions. I certainly think it was an interesting trip to take. I am supposed to be at a conference on Abraham Joshua Heschel at the end of the year in Israel, but it looks like that. I mean, the conference will happen, but it doesn't look like Israel will have any outside scholars speaking at that conference. So looks like we'll probably be doing a couple more Torah classes. I wasn't going till the 23rd anyway, but I have a feeling that Omicron may scotch that travel plan, which is okay because I still have a ways to go before I recover from jet lag. And that's the report from Westwood, LA, for Vayechi. If there aren't any other questions at the moment, then I will say to you, I hope you have a wonderful day, a beautiful Shabbat. And please remember that this Shabbat morning is Shabbat Morning Live. It's a grandparent Shabbat. We will be talking about Lador Vador from generation to generation. And I hope that you will join us on Shabbat morning. And take care. Talk to you soon.